I found this cool data set online for epilepsy data, and I thought it'd be perfect for showing you guys a couple tricks for manipulating data and how to build a basic pivot table. So this data set has, it looks like 6 columns and a couple hundred rows. So I'm going to apply a filter so I can get a feel for what this data is structured like. To apply a filter, you just take your cursor and move to the Data tab. And on the Data tab, you look for this little icon here called the filter. And I actually use it all the time, so I just have it right here in my quick access toolbar. I'd recommend that for you as well. So when we look at the subjects, we can get an idea of how many subjects are in this data set, about 60. It went all the way to number 59. And then for treatments, it looks like just a couple options, the placebo and the active. And this column is just a baseline, so it's the qualifying seizure rate that got the patient into the study. And I think before I look at this data, I just want to make sure that the placebo subjects are kind of similar to the subjects on active. So we'll do that analysis in a moment here. This is just their age at the time of entry. And this study has 4 different periods. So it's a measure of the seizure rate over time taken for each period. So this could be like a 3-day, it just depends on the study. So within that period, here is the actual result, the rate of seizures that the patients had versus the rate they had at baseline. So let's take a look and just make sure that the placebo patients have roughly the same kind of baseline average as the active subjects. So I'm going to take the filter off. So let me just show you. I clicked here to open my little button. There you go. And then I just take the active off. So just the placebo patients are selected now. I'm going to put the cursor right here on this number and hit the Control Shift down arrow on a Mac, so it's Command Shift down. It just quickly selects the entire range. So 104 records were found, and right here it has a sum, which doesn't help me. So I'm going to change it to average. Now I have some statistics to kind of tell me about this data set. So on average, the placebo subjects had around 26, 27 seizures for their baseline rate. And maybe some patients had higher than others. Remember yesterday we learned about conditional formatting. So you could always just turn on the conditional formatting if you wanted to get a feel for who had the most. You could use, these color scales are great. The red, yellow, and green kind of light up the ones. Ooh, there's a hot patient right there. But what I might actually do is try some data bars. So just to try something different, check that out. We got the data bars really showing you, on a patient-by-patient basis who's having the most seizures. But we're going to use the Control-Z, which is one of our favorite Excel shortcuts. It just undoes everything. So you can always just quickly undo your mess with Control-Z. So we still have this filter on the treatment. I guess we could look at the average age of the patients. Again, it was just Control-Shift down, Command-Shift down for me. And they're like 28 years old, so pretty young. And let's go look at the active patients and just make sure that they had roughly the same amount of seizures, just for fun. I'm going to select that cell C106 because there's 120 records. So for whatever reason, some of those placebo subjects got deleted or got dropped out of this data set. But again, on average of like 27 seizures for the baseline rate. So that's great. So, okay, data looks pretty similar in both groups. Now, maybe we want to take a look at the seizure rate by age. So a pivot table would be a great way to do that because we want to basically group some data together. So all the filters are off. And to find our pivot table, we actually just go, let me turn on this. Let's go to data. And here in the ribbon, we have this option for the pivot table. So I'm going to put the cursor anywhere within the data set. Don't even have to select it. Just say pivot table. And it automatically creates a pivot table. Now, the one it created by default is kind of nonsense, but we'll fix that. So in the pivot table, there's basically 4 options. And I'm going to turn everything off and build it for you one by one. I always start with building either the column or the row. So what would I want to show down the side here if I was trying to look at maybe the average number of seizures in the final period of the study? So let's put all of the ages across the top. And you can see that we're going to get data for all these different ages. And then we can put the periods down the side here. Periods 1, 2, 3, and 4. Fantastic. And all we need now is just something to give us a sum. So I think the seizure rate would be ideal. And for the 18-year-olds in period 1, all 18-year-olds, all treatments, it was a sum of 13. Well, sum doesn't really help us, so I'm going to change this to an average. So looking here, there's a little button to edit this, and we're going to change it to an average. Now watch what happens to the data in the table. It's going to refresh itself. So now we've got something that's meaningful. So you can kind of see how patients in these cohorts are going. But again, it doesn't really help you because you don't know who's on which treatment. So what we can do is we can actually put the treatments in here as well. So here for period 1, you've got placebo plus the active, and then, but that looks a little messy, so I'm going to do it like this. You can just switch it up. So here you have the treatment and then the periods below it. Now, let's say that I didn't want to see all this data. I just wanted to see that final period. You can go in here and actually, filter that down. Select the field of treatment, and you can choose from there. So there we go. Sorry, period. And then we'll just say, oh, I only care about period 4. At the end of the study, what was up with these patients? Well, we'll just do period 3. We'll do the middle of the study. Okay, fantastic. So still a little bit noisy. What's kind of weird is I have every single age all by itself, and I have totals, which don't mean anything. So we can go to back to our data menu, and there are some options here for the pivot table. So we'll just step on the pivot table, and we can get rid of these totals because they really don't mean anything. So we won't show it for either of them. All right, so we've got our averages and still a pretty messy table. So what I recommend is to group some data. So you can actually grab all the 18 to 25-year-olds, and I'm right-clicking group. Now I can collapse that group, and it's just going to give me the average of all those. Now 26 to 31, I don't know, we'll group them. Not sure how meaningful that is, but then that just leaves us the 30 to 40-year-olds. So we'll group them. Maybe we'll pretend like these are clinically meaningful groups, and we'll just do 4 groups. And everybody over 40 gets grouped. Okay, so your pivot table automatically put in names for these, and we can always change the look and feel of our pivot table up here in this pivot table style. We can always pick something that we like a little bit more. There's a ton of different options. Make it super colorful. So I am going to rename these groups so they're actually meaningful to me. So group 4, I'm going to go here and actually change this to 40 plus. That kind of means a little bit more. This one, I can't remember what we picked, so we'll say it was 30 somethings. There they are. These are 20 somethings. I think they were like 25 and over. I can't remember because I wasn't being very strategic. And these are our young'uns, the youngest patients. So young uns, there you go. All right, so just looking at this data then in period 3, we can see that actually there was a much higher rate of seizures in the placebo group for these older patients. And then for the active patients, much, much lower actually. So don't know if it's statistically significant, but I wanted to give you a couple ways to group data. And the basic concept here is I wanted to show you that you could format a table, that you could adjust whether or not there's totals or subtotals, and that you could quickly just change the look and feel of the columns and the rows. I also showed you how to group data, and we showed you how to change the display from a sum to a value. One other one that I like to use all the time is a count. Counts are fantastic for text data. There's a count. And that's really good if you're just trying to figure out how many uniques. So that's your epilepsy data set, and I hope you learned something, and let me know if you have questions. And now you should be able to look at a large set of data and quickly distill it into a small table just so you can summarize it. So thanks for watching. More videos tomorrow.